Have you ever been sitting in the passenger seat of a car and the person driving is just going, well, a little too slow?
Oh, yeah, like painfully slow.
Right. Or maybe they're, hesitating at a busy intersection, the traffic is piling up behind you, people are honking, and you feel that overwhelming, almost visceral urge to just reach over and seize the steering wheel.
Yes, just grab it and go.
Exactly. You know the exact feeling. It's that sudden adrenaline spike in your chest, and that internal voice is just screaming, if you aren't going to fix this, I will.
It's totally universal.
It really is. I mean, we are biologically and psychologically wired to hate feeling out of control. It feels like a literal threat to our survival.
Because your brain thinks you're going to crash.
Right. But what happens when that instinct isn't about driving a car, but about driving your entire life? Like, what happens when a situation you are facing feels incredibly uncertain?
Yeah, the big stuff.
Exactly. When the timing of whatever you're desperately waiting for, whether you call it the universe's timing or God's timing, feels painfully, excruciatingly slow.
That is arguably the ultimate pressure test of the human condition.
Right.
When the gap between what you are promised and what you're currently experiencing stretches out indefinitely, the temptation to bridge that gap with your own hands, it becomes nearly irresistible.
You just want to fix it.
Exactly. And today, that is the core of our exploration. In this deep dive, we are looking into the pathology of human control versus the theology of divine surrender.
It's such a massive topic.
It is. We are going to examine why some of history's most famous biblical figures, leaders who, operated at the highest levels of spiritual authority, catastrophically failed the very moment they tried to force an outcome.
Yeah, when they grabbed the wheel.
Right. We're looking at the mechanics of why we panic, why we seize the wheel, and the immense collateral damage it causes.
And we aren't just staying in the ancient world either, for you listening. Because the same psychological architecture that caused a king to fall thousands of years ago, it's the exact same architecture driving our anxieties today.
Completely identical.
We're going to look at how this impulse to control shows up right now, today, in your relationships and your bank accounts.
Which is where it really hits home.
For sure.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we're going to explore how practicing total surrender, which, let's be honest, sounds terrifying and passive to a modern ear.
Yeah, nobody wants to surrender.
Right. But how it actually leads to the ultimate spiritual freedom and psychological resilience.
Because surrender is so frequently framed in our culture as a defeat. White flag you wave when you've just run out of options.
Like giving up.
Exactly. But when you dig into the linguistic and theological roots, it is the exact opposite. It's an active, hyper-intentional posture.
I always think of the human tendency to take control, like aggressively jamming a puzzle piece into the wrong spot just because you're tired of waiting to find the right one.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Because it doesn't quite fit. You can literally see the edges bending. You have to pound it with the heel of your hand.
Just forcing it in there.
Yeah. But you do it anyway because you just want the hole filled.
Yeah.
And sure, you might temporarily fill the space, but you permanently damage the picture.
You ruin the whole puzzle.
Exactly. So to understand why we do this and the sheer scale of the damage it causes, we really need to look at the historical case studies of leaders who essentially had a direct line to the divine.
The ones who should have known better.
Right, but who still snapped under the pressure and grabbed that steering wheel.
So our first case study places us in the ultimate pressure cooker. We are looking at King Saul in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 13.
Okay, set the scene for us.
The geopolitical tension here is just suffocating. Saul is the newly minted king of Israel, and he is facing down a massive Philistine military force.
And they were intimidating, right?
Oh, completely. The text describes their numbers as being like the sand of the seashore. And to understand the panic, you have to realize the Philistines held a monopoly on iron-making technology at this time.
Wow. So they had the advanced weapons.
Exactly. While the Israelites were essentially a Bronze Age militia armed with, farming tools.
So guys with pitchforks going up against iron swords.
Right. The technological and numerical disparity is just terrifying. Saul's professional soldiers are paralyzed by fear, and they're actively deserting him.
Just running away?
Yeah, hiding in caves and thickets. And on top of this, the prophet Samuel, who holds the priestly authority to perform the crucial pre-battle sacrifice, He's late.
The worst possible time for the expert to be late.
Absolutely. He gave a strict 7-day deadline. The seventh day is literally ticking away. The sun is going down, and Samuel is nowhere to be found.
Okay, I have to pause here and look at this from a purely human perspective. Because if you put yourself in Saul's shoes, his reaction feels entirely relatable.
It really does.
I mean, even justifiable. The deadline is literally expiring. The expert consultant you hired is a no-show. Your team is bleeding personnel by the hour, and an army with superior weapons is mobilizing against you.
The pressure is immense.
Wouldn't any competent leader, like any good CEO or general, step up and take decisive action to stop the bleeding and save the project?
To stabilize the situation, yeah.
Right. It feels less like a spiritual rebellion and more like just necessary pragmatism. He needed to boost troop morale.
It absolutely reads as pragmatic to our modern, efficiency-obsessed sensibilities, but the theological analysis points out a fatal flaw in Saul's pragmatism.
What's the flaw?
It exposes a profound lack of spiritual memory. Just prior to this event, Samuel had specifically reminded Saul of the historical narrative of Gideon.
Oh, Gideon, the guy with the shrinking army.
Exactly. Gideon was a judge who defeated a massive Midianite army with a continually shrinking force. God commanded Gideon to systematically reduce his army, literally sending thousands of men home, specifically so that Israel wouldn't be able to boast that their own strength had saved them.
So Saul is watching his own army evaporate.
Right.
And instead of seeing it as the stage being set for a divine intervention, he just sees the math failing. He's doing the head count and freaking out.
He completely forgot that losing soldiers historically was often God's signature method of battle.
Wow. God's signature method. That's a profound way to look at it.
Yeah, God strips away the human scaffolding so that the reliance is entirely on him. But Saul couldn't see past the terrifying calculus of the battlefield.
He was totally blinded by the crisis.
And furthermore, look at how Saul treated the sacrifice itself. Under this immense psychological strain, he oversteps his civil authority as a king.
Right, because kings aren't priests.
Exactly. He steps into the exclusive, restricted domain of the priesthood and performs the burnt offering himself.
He just does it.
He does. He treated the sacrifice like a utilitarian, magical ritual. His internal logic was basically, if I just perform the physical mechanics of this ritual, I can manipulate divine favor and get God on my side.
Oh, like a vending machine. Put the coin in, get the blessing out.
Yes. He entirely missed that the sacrifice was designed to be an expression of relational obedience. He prioritized the procedure over the person of God.
So he jammed the puzzle piece in. The shape of the sacrifice looked right, but the alignment was completely wrong.
And the fallout is immediate, and it is devastating. Samuel arrives the exact moment the sacrifice finishes.
Of course he does. It's like a movie.
It's a tragic, poetic irony. And because of this self-willed intervention, this inability to wait just a few more hours, Saul loses his dynastic succession.
Like his whole legacy.
The kingdom will be torn from his family line, and the true tragic victim here is his son, Jonathan.
Because Jonathan is actually a great guy, right?
If you read the rest of the text, Jonathan is an incredibly faithful, brave, and honorable leader. Yet Jonathan is disinherited from the throne entirely because of his father's inability to endure the tension of waiting.
Man, it is a brutal reality check on how our panic doesn't just affect us. Like, it disinherits the people coming after us.
Generational consequences.
But, Saul cracked under the acute, immediate terror of a battlefield. What happens when the pressure isn't a sudden crisis, but a chronic, grinding exhaustion?
That takes us to Moses.
Right. We are in the book of Numbers, chapter 20. The location is Meribah, specifically at a place called Kadesh. And the geography here carries massive psychological weight, doesn't it?
It really does. Kadesh is essentially ground zero for Israel's historical trauma.
Why is that?
It's the exact spot where the previous generation of Israelites had rebelled 38 years prior.
Oh, the rebellion that led to all the wandering.
Exactly. So Moses isn't just in a physically barren desert. He is walking back into a site of deep generational failure.
That has to trigger something in him. Add to that his physical and emotional state. I mean, he is exhausted. He has been managing a chronically rebellious, dissatisfied, thirsty nation for decades.
Just constant complaining.
And there is a deeply personal, often overlooked layer here, too. He is actively grieving. Yes, his sister, Miriam, the one who watched over him when he was a baby in the basket, she has just died. And the pacing of the text strongly implies he hasn't even had the space or time to properly mourn her. before the people start rioting about the water supply again.
You literally have the perfect storm for a breakdown. Physical exhaustion, geographical trauma, acute unprocessed grief, and this unrelenting public demand.
So Moses falls on his face before God.
And God gives him a highly specific directive. He says, take your staff, gather the assembly, and speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield water.
Speak to it.
Yes, it's meant to be a calm, miraculous provision.
But the internal pressure cooker just explodes. Fueled by all that suppressed frustration and rage, Moses ignores the directive. He doesn't speak to the rock.
He turns on the people.
Yeah, he turns to the assembly of Israelites and screams, "Listen, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And then he violently strikes the rock twice with his staff.
Just pure anger.
And water does come out. But God's judgment is swift and severe. Moses, the man who spent his whole life trying to get to the promised land, is barred from entering it.
It's a shocking moment in the text.
It is, because honestly, if you were just reading this casually, it feels wildly disproportionate.
Right, like an overreaction.
Yeah. He hit a rock with a stick. He was super stressed out. Why is this a career-ending felony?
It does feel disproportionate until you unpack the deep theological severity of what actually occurred in that moment. It is multi-layered.
Okay, break it down for us.
First, consider the usurpation of agency. By yelling, "Shall we bring water?" Moses and his brother Aaron are falsely implying that the miracle is a product of their own human effort.
Like it's their own magic trick.
Exactly, or their own authority. They are verbally taking credit for the divine grace of God.
So in his anger, he makes himself the provider. He essentially stands in the place of God.
He eclipses God in front of the entire nation. Second, Moses fundamentally distorts God's character.
Right.
The Israelites are thirsty and desperate. God's intention in this moment was to present himself as a compassionate, merciful provider who hears their cries.
But Moses was furious.
Right. Moses substitutes his own unhinged emotional rage for God's holiness. By screaming and violently striking the rock, he paints a portrait of God as an impatient, wrathful, exasperated judge.
Oh.
He was called to be an image bearer, to reflect the nature of God, and instead he projected his own burnout and resentment onto the divine.
That's terrifying. He used his platform to misrepresent the person he was supposed to be speaking for.
Exactly, but there's an even deeper layer here regarding the symbolism of the rock itself.
Oh, right, the Christological typology. Walk us through that.
So in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul writes to the Corinthians and explicitly states that the wilderness rock was a type or prophetic symbol of Christ.
Okay.
Now, trace this back. Years earlier, in Exodus 17, at a totally different location, God specifically commanded Moses to strike the rock once to bring forth water.
So he was told to strike it the first time.
Yes. Theologically, that single striking represented Christ's once-and-for-all sacrifice on the cross. The judgment fell, the rock was struck, the life-giving water flowed.
Okay, so the symbol is established. The striking represents the cross.
Exactly. Now fast forward back to Meribah. God tells Moses to speak to the rock, not hit it. By striking the rock twice in his rage, Moses shattered that prophetic picture.
Oh, because you don't crucify Christ twice.
Precisely. Symbolically, his actions implied that the sacrifice was insufficient, that the rock needed to be beaten again and again. It ruins the metaphor of penal substitutionary atonement being a finished work.
That is so deep, just from hitting a rock.
And furthermore, historical commentators like Rashi point out the severe desecration of God's name in this moment.
In what way?
Well, if Moses had simply spoken to the inanimate rock and the rock obeyed, the rebellious Israelites would have been confronted with a staggering reality. They'd think, if even a lifeless rock obeys the mere word of God, how much more must we, his people, obey him?
Wow. He robbed God of that teaching moment.
He did. He made it about his stick and his strength. He robbed God of that pedagogical glory.
It's a terrifying realization. Because when we are exhausted and grieving, our instinct is to force an outcome with whatever tools we have. In his case, a staff and a lot of anger.
Our default is control.
But in doing so, we don't just mess up a procedure. We misrepresent who God is to everyone watching.
We project our panic onto him.
Right. So Saul and Moses both cracked under the massive public pressure of national leadership. But the exact same pathology of control operates in our most intimate, private spheres.
It's just as destructive at home.
Exactly. It destroys our families. If we look at the familial level, we see how forcing the promise creates this terrible generational trauma. Let's look at Abraham, Sarah, and the Hagar paradigm in Genesis 16.
This is perhaps the classic biblical case study in trying to help God out.
Helping God, right?
Abraham and Sarah have been waiting 11 years for God's promised heir. And 11 years is an agonizingly long time to sustain faith without evidence.
Most of us can't wait 11 days.
Right. The writer of Proverbs notes that hope deferred makes the heart sick, and we really see that sickness setting in here. Beyond the internal doubt, Sarah is bearing the severe social and cultural stigma of barrenness.
And in the ancient Near East, that wasn't just a personal sadness.
Oh, no. It was often viewed as a literal divine curse or a catastrophic failure of a woman's fundamental societal role.
The vulnerability and the shame she must have felt daily, I mean, that would be absolutely crushing.
Completely isolating.
She desperately wants the promise,
Yeah.
but the silence of God's timing is basically driving her mad. So she resorts to a socially acceptable, pragmatic loophole of her era.
The surrogate plan.
Yeah, she offers her Egyptian maidservant, Hagar, to Abraham as a surrogate to manufacture the promised seed.
What's critical here is a specific information gap in the narrative up to this point.
Okay, what gap?
God had explicitly promised Abraham that he would have a son. But at this exact moment in the timeline, God had not yet explicitly named Sarah as the mother of that child in the covenant.
Oh, that completely shifts the perspective. I never thought about that. She didn't have the full picture.
She was operating on partial revelation. Lacking the full information, Sarah looks at her failing biology and assumes she is the absolute roadblock to God's plan.
She thinks, I'm the problem.
Yes, her internal logic is, God promised a son to my husband. I am clearly incapable, therefore, God needs my help.
So she steps aside.
Right. She thinks, I need to step aside and use whatever fleshly, pragmatic means are at my disposal to facilitate his will. She attempts to manage the divine agenda.
And Abraham's role here is equally destructive, isn't it?
Absolutely. Instead of seeking God's counsel or, comforting his wife and pointing her back to faith, he passively abdicates his spiritual leadership.
He just goes along with the plan.
He does.
He takes his hands completely off the wheel when he should have been steering them toward trust. And the fallout is a highly toxic, destructive marital triangle.
Predictably.
Hagar conceives, and predictably, the power dynamics shift. Hagar becomes insolent and looks down on Sarah.
Which is human nature. Right. And Sarah realizes her brilliant, pragmatic plan is a total disaster. But rather than owning her manipulation, she projects all her guilt and anger right back onto Abraham. She actually screams at him, "My wrong be upon you."
It is the textbook psychological transference of guilt.
Tell me more about that.
Well, we manufacture a crisis through our own desperate need for control, right? And when the consequences arrive and blow up in our faces, we aggressively blame the people around us.
You never want to hold the bag.
Never. And Abraham's passivity then deepens even further. He essentially washes his hands of the entire conflict, telling Sarah, your maid is in your power, do to her as you please.
Just a total failure to lead.
Total abdication. And this leads to extreme domestic cruelty. Sarah deals so harshly with Hagar that the pregnant woman is forced to flee into the lethal environment of the desert.
The attempt to force God's hand basically introduced a lifelong generational friction into their home.
It's the ultimate cautionary tale against using worldly shortcuts to achieve spiritual promises. You might get a result.
The child was born.
Right, but the collateral damage will haunt you.
Which brings us to the next family disaster. Jacob, Rebekah, and the stolen blessing in Genesis 27. If Abraham and Sarah's house was struggling with toxic dynamics, Isaac and Rebekah's house operates like a ruthless, dysfunctional corporate takeover.
The corporate analogy works perfectly here because they really are dealing with the transmission of massive covenantal assets.
Exactly. You have Isaac, the aging CEO of the family. He is physically blind, but the narrative makes it clear he is also deeply spiritually blind.
He's living in the flesh.
He is stubbornly, actively trying to defy a prophecy God had given years earlier. God had explicitly declared that the older son, Esau, would serve the younger son, Jacob.
That was the stated plan.
But Isaac wants to secretly transfer the covenantal blessing, the ultimate authority and inheritance, to his favorite son, Esau. Why? Because he admires Esau's rugged, manly hunter image.
He likes what he sees, or what he tastes, really.
Yes, he literally loves the wild game Esau cooks for him. It is a terrifyingly superficial, fleshly appetite driving a permanent spiritual decision.
Isaac is attempting to maneuver and manipulate divine promises based entirely on his stomach and his personal preferences.
It's crazy.
He is trying to force his will over God's stated plan.
Then you have Rebekah, the mother. She overhears this secret plot. She knows God's plan is for Jacob to get the blessing.
She remembers the prophecy.
But instead of confronting her husband or, I don't know, trusting God to protect the transfer of the company assets, she engineers an incredibly elaborate web of identity theft.
A literal disguise.
She cooks the food to mimic Esau's game. She takes goat skins and ties them to Jacob's arms and neck so he feels hairy to his blind father. And she sends him into the bedroom to execute the fraud.
It's wild.
Literally nobody in the family trusts the CEO or God to distribute the assets properly, so everyone is forging signatures and backstabbing in the dark.
And if you look closely at Jacob's behavior during the deception, you see the absolute depths of pragmatism.
He's all in on the lie.
He is. When Isaac gets suspicious because Jacob's voice doesn't match his hairy arms, Isaac asks him how he found the wild game so quickly.
And what does Jacob do?
Jacob doesn't just lie to his father. He commits outright blasphemy. He says, "Because the Lord your God granted me success."
Oof, that is dark.
He weaponizes the name of God to validate a fraudulent scheme. Jacob wasn't experiencing any moral crisis about lying to his dying father. He was only anxious about the mechanics of getting caught.
Is my disguise good enough?
Exactly. His only concern was, what if my father feels my arms and realizes I'm a deceiver? He was completely detached from the morality of the situation.
Does the goat skin work? Does the disguise hold up? That's literally all that mattered to him. And yes, mechanically, the scheme works. Jacob successfully steals the blessing.
He gets what he wants.
But the consequences are an absolute nightmare.
The fallout is a masterclass in talionic justice.
Talionic justice.
Yeah, the biblical principle of eye for an eye, poetic retribution. Jacob secures the blessing, but he loses his family and his home. He is forced to flee into a 20-year exile with nothing but a staff to escape Esau's murderous rage.
Just totally isolated.
And Rebecca, the mastermind who engineered the entire deception to elevate her favorite son, she never sees Jacob again.
Oh, wow.
She dies while he is in exile. In fact, there is a chilling silence in the text regarding her death. There is no recorded memorial or mourning period for Rebecca, which many scholars read as a silent, divine censure of her manipulative control.
That's heartbreaking. And the poetic justice for Jacob is really haunting, too.
It follows him his whole life.
He spends the rest of his life being deceived by the exact same methods he used on his father.
Yep.
He deceived Isaac in the dark using goat skins. Years later, his uncle Laban deceives him in the dark by switching brides under a veil.
Right, Leah instead of Rachel.
And decades after that, Jacob's own sons deceive him into believing his favorite son Joseph is dead by bringing him a tunic soaked in goat's blood. He reaps exactly what he sowed.
It vividly proves the point. When we step out of trust and into manipulation, the collateral damage doesn't just affect the immediate situation, it ripples through decades of our lives.
Decades. And this is where we really have to pivot and look in the mirror.
Yeah.
Because we read these ancient texts, it's so easy to distance ourselves, right?
Well, absolutely.
We think, well, I'm not sacrificing animals, and I'm definitely not tying goat skins to my arms to lie to my dad, so I'm doing fine.
I'm much more civilized.
Right. But the underlying psychology is identical. We apply these exact same manipulative, self-reliant shortcuts to the major pressure points of modern life. We just use different tools.
Our idols are just updated.
Exactly. The modern idols of control revolve heavily around two massive anxiety centers: relationships and wealth. Let's start with the idol of coupling, specifically regarding singleness and divine timing.
The societal trap here is profound. Modern culture, and quite frankly, a significant portion of religious culture as well, treats singleness as a deficit state.
A deficit state.
Yes. It is implicitly viewed as a problem to be solved, a transition phase, or a waiting room before your real life actually begins.
And when you marinate in that societal narrative, it creates immense internal anxiety. If you believe your life is fundamentally incomplete without a partner, the temptation to grasp for control becomes overwhelming.
You feel like you're failing.
You do. You see this constantly. People settle for partnerships they know are unhealthy or unequally yoked, or they rush headlong into relationships driven entirely by a fear of abandonment or isolation.
Which is exactly what we were just talking about. It is the modern iteration of the Hagar paradigm.
It is trying to force the promise.
Precisely. You have a completely legitimate, God-given desire, the desire for companionship, intimacy, and love. But because the timing feels unbearable or the prospects look bleak, you attempt to fulfill that legitimate desire through pragmatic, fleshly
We
means.
grab the wheel.
You try to force the promise.
Mm.
But the biblical recalibration for this anxiety is actually quite radical. The New Testament completely upends the deficit model of singleness.
It doesn't see it as a waiting room.
Not at all. It insists that singleness is not a lack, but a legitimate, complete, and highly fruitful calling. Consider that Jesus Christ and the Apostle Paul, the central figure of the faith and its greatest theologian, were both single.
That's a huge point that gets ignored.
It does. The theological reality they modeled is that ultimate, complete relational satisfaction is found in union with God, not in coupling with another human being.
There's a really fascinating psychological overlay here regarding attachment theory. Because how does our relationship with God actually function psychologically when we are facing the isolation of singleness?
Well, attachment theory essentially maps how human beings form bonds to create a sense of security and navigate fear.
Right, like babies with their parents.
Exactly. Psychologists identify the need for a secure base. In the context of a robust spiritual life, God serves as what psychologists call the compensatory attachment figure.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
When a person cultivates a deep, genuinely trusting relationship with God, it provides profound emotional regulation. It isn't just an abstract theological idea, it acts as a literal psychological buffer.
It calms the nervous system.
Yes, God becomes the secure anchor, allowing the individual to navigate periods of intense isolation, loneliness, or relational disappointment with resilient psychological health rather than desperate panic.
So the solution isn't just to grit your teeth and passively resign yourself to being alone.
No, not at all.
It requires what is often called active waiting, or laboring in prayer. Instead of obsessively trying to control your dating life or swiping endlessly on apps in a total panic, use the season of singleness to dismantle your own defensive coping mechanisms.
You do the internal work.
You actively lean into the secure base. You say, I'm going to trust the driver.
Beautifully said.
But relationships are only half the battle. The other massive modern idol of control is the illusion of autonomy, specifically regarding how we accumulate wealth.
The trap of wealth is incredibly insidious because it is universally celebrated.
Right, you get praised for this one.
Exactly. We accumulate resources, money, and assets to construct a life that is so heavily insulated that we feel we no longer need to rely on the daily, active provision of God.
We want a cushion.
We build massive financial buffers specifically to keep vulnerability at bay. We are basically trying to buy our way out of needing faith.
I want to clarify something here because it's a really common pushback when we talk about money. For anyone listening, is the argument that having money or wanting a healthy relationship is inherently bad? Is ambition wrong?
Not at all.
Or is the issue entirely about what we are using to buffer ourselves from needing God?
It is entirely the latter. It is fundamentally an issue of ultimate allegiance and functional trust.
Okay, elaborate on that.
To illustrate how wealth creates an illusion of control, we can look at two specific narratives from the Gospel of Luke. The account of the rich young ruler and the parable of the rich fool.
Let's analyze the rich young ruler first, because this is a guy who seemingly has his entire life together.
He really does. He approaches Jesus asking what he must do to inherit eternal life. He confidently asserts that he has kept all the moral and religious commandments since his youth.
He's the perfect church kid.
Yes, he is morally upright and incredibly wealthy. But Jesus locates his idol immediately. Jesus tells him to sell everything he has, distribute the money to the poor, and follow him.
And how does he react?
The man walks away in deep sorrow.
Yeah.
Why? Because his wealth was an impenetrable barrier to actual discipleship. It was his true god of control.
He could let it go.
He was perfectly willing, even eager, to obey religious rules as long as those rules didn't threaten his autonomy. But he absolutely could not endure the thought of material vulnerability.
He wanted the spiritual life. He wanted the assurance of eternity, but he demanded to keep his hands firmly clamped on the steering wheel of his physical security here and now.
He wanted God as an add-on, not a master.
And then we have the parable of the rich fool, which reveals the darker, more exploitative side, hoarding control.
The rich fool is a farmer who experiences an unprecedented, massive surplus of crops. His land produces so much that his current storage is inadequate.
A good problem to have.
Right. So he decides to tear down his existing barns to build much larger ones to hoard his grain for years to come. Now, on the surface, to a modern capitalist reader, he sounds like a prudent forward-thinking businessman.
Like someone preparing for retirement.
Exactly. But an analysis of ancient Near East agricultural economics reveals the actual reality of his actions. In an ancient agrarian society, by hoarding that much surplus grain, he wasn't just saving for a rainy day. He was unethically withholding a vital resource from the local market.
Oh, wow. I never realized that. So he was intentionally manipulating the supply chain.
Precisely. By locking away the surplus, he was artificially driving up local grain prices. He was consolidating his own social and economic power at the direct expense of the starving peasants in his community.
That is so gross.
He was actively exploiting the vulnerability of others to build his own impenetrable fortress of autonomy.
That completely shatters the Sunday school reading of that parable.
Mhm.
He isn't just a guy who saved too much. He's a monopolist crushing his neighbors to feel safe.
And the vocabulary he uses in the story is incredibly telling.
What does he say?
In just 3 short verses outlining his business plan, he uses the word I 6 times and the word my 5 times.
I will do this.
I will pull down my barns, my grain, my goods, my soul. It is a completely closed, claustrophobic loop of self-worship.
Just me.
He fundamentally believed his physical surplus secured his soul, completely ignoring his creaturely finitude. He forgot that he was mortal, that his life could be demanded of him that very night by God.
Which, in the parable, it is. God literally says, tonight your soul is required of you.
Right. He built an economic fortress, but forgot he was made of dust. Both the rich young ruler and the rich fool highlight the core pathology. Using physical things, whether it's an overflowing bank account, a romantic relationship, a goatskin disguise, or an unauthorized sacrifice to seize control and bypass the vulnerability of trusting God.
So if we pull all of these threads together, for you listening, seizing control under pressure destroys dynastic legacies like Saul's. It fractures families and causes generational trauma like Abraham's and Isaac's. And in our modern context, it leaves us relationally anxious, isolated, and economically hoarding.
The pattern is undeniable.
The pathology of control is abundantly clear. The question then becomes, what is the actual alternative? Because if just giving up and being a passive doormat isn't the biblical solution, what does the theology of true surrender actually look like?
To understand the mechanics of true surrender, we have to bypass our modern English connotations and dive deeply into the linguistics.
The original languages.
Yes, the original Greek and Hebrew words used by the biblical authors.
Let's get into the linguistics. I find this fascinating because it completely flips how we view the concept. Let's look at the Greek word peristemi.
Peristemi is a highly dynamic word. It literally means to place beside, to present, or to yield. It is the exact verb the Apostle Paul uses in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, when he urges believers to present your bodies as a living sacrifice. What is absolutely crucial to understand here is that peristemi is an active, decisive, and initiatory verb. It is something you consciously do.
Which is the exact opposite of how we naturally conceptualize surrender. Because when we think of surrender, we usually think of another Greek word, paradidomi, right?
Correct. Paradidomi means to hand over, to give up, or to betray. It is the word used in the Gospels when Judas betrays Jesus, handing him over to the authorities.
So it's negative.
Very much so. Paradidomi implies a total loss of power, a forced capitulation against your will because you're overpowered. Peristemi, on the other hand, is entirely voluntary and purposeful.
The way I visualize the difference is this. Paradidomi is like a defeated prisoner of war. You are surrounded, out of ammo, so you raise your hands in the air and passively give up because you literally have no other choice.
You are conquered.
Right, but peristemi, the surrender God is actually asking for, is like a highly trained elite soldier who actively marches up to their commanding officer, salutes, and says, reporting for duty, I am fully equipped, I have my agency, and I am choosing to place it under your command. Put me where you need me.
That is a perfect illustration.
One is a loss of agency, the other is the highest utilization of it.
That distinction changes everything. And Paul immediately connects this active presentation of ourselves to another Greek word in Romans 12.1, logikos, which is translated as spiritual or reasonable service.
Logikos, it sounds exactly like our word logic.
Because it is the root of it. The text is making a profound philosophical argument. It is saying that in light of God's immense mercies, his character, and his sovereignty, active surrender isn't some wild, irrational, blind leap into the dark.
It's not checking your brain at the door.
No, it is the only logical, coherent, intellectually reasonable response a human being can make. If God is actually who he says he is, the sovereign creator of the universe, then handing over the steering wheel is the smartest, most rational thing you can possibly do.
And we see the Old Testament equivalent of this posture in the Hebrew word hineni, which translates to, "Here am I."
It's an incredible phrase.
It really is. You
Yeah.
see Abraham say it when God calls him. Moses says it at the burning bush. Isaiah says it in the temple. It signifies a preemptive, unconditional availability to God's mission, regardless of the cost.
They don't negotiate.
They don't ask to see the itinerary or the risk assessment before they agree to the trip. They just respond, "Hineni, I'm here, use me."
Now, moving from the linguistic definitions to the gritty, practical application, we can look at a theological framework popularized by the early 20th century Christian teacher, Watchman Nee.
Watchman Nee.
Yes. He outlined 4 distinct phases of experiential sanctification. And sanctification is just the theological term for the ongoing process of becoming holy, of actually living out this surrender in your daily life.
Okay, let's walk through these 4 phases because this is where the rubber meets the road for anyone struggling with anxiety. What is the first phase?
The first phase is knowing. This is entirely foundational. It is about comprehending the objective, historical reality of your union with Christ.
Knowing the facts.
You have to actually know what the biblical text says about who God is, what Christ accomplished on the cross, and who you are as a result.
Right, because you cannot surrender to a reality you don't intellectually understand. If your theology is flawed, if you view God as an angry boss waiting for you to fail, you will never let go of the wheel.
Exactly. You'll just try to appease him. Which brings us to the second and perhaps most difficult phase, reckoning.
Reckoning.
The Greek word used by Paul here is logizomai. It is literally an accounting term. It means to calculate, to compute, or to credit something to your account as an absolute, unchangeable fact.
Like balancing a ledger.
Yes. Watchman Nee argues that you must reckon God's truth as fact, rather than constantly trying to manufacture a spiritual experience or waiting for a specific emotional feeling to validate your faith. You bank on the truth.
So, practically speaking, if I am in the middle of a crisis, say I just lost my job or a relationship ended, and I am physically shaking with anxiety, my brain is telling me to panic and fix it. Reckoning means I don't wait for the anxiety to magically disappear before I believe God is in control.
You don't wait for the feeling.
I reckon His sovereignty as a concrete fact, even while my nervous system is screaming at me. I force the fact to dictate my reality, not my fluctuating emotions.
Yes, you do not deny your emotions, but you subordinate them to the objective truth, which leads directly to the third phase, yielding.
Bringing us back to paristemi.
Exactly. Yielding is the voluntary surrender of the physical body and the human will to the Holy Spirit. You stop trying to power your own holiness, you stop trying to manipulate your circumstances with goat skins and Hagar paradigms, and you actively present your members for his use.
So, knowing, reckoning, yielding. What is the final phase?
The fourth phase is walking. And the critical insight here is that walking in newness of life is not an independent, white-knuckled effort.
It's not just trying harder.
No. Walking is described as the continuous natural byproduct of the first 3 steps. When you know the truth, reckon it as fact, and yield your will, walking out the Christian life happens as a spontaneous, organic manifestation of Christ's life operating within you.
It fundamentally shifts the Christian life from a draining performance to a relational byproduct. And that brings up a sobering, crucial point. Surrender is, at its absolute core, a relational encounter. It is not about executing spectacular religious deeds or having a perfect moral resume.
This is a terrifying reality check found in Matthew chapter 7. Jesus warns that at the end of the age, many people will come to him pointing to their spiritual resumes.
Looking for credit.
Right.
Yeah.
They will say, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name and cast out demons and perform mighty miracles? These are massive, spectacular religious accomplishments.
Elite tier stuff.
And Jesus replies, I never knew you. Depart from me.
They had the elite resume, but they had absolutely no relational intimacy.
They were still entirely in the driver's seat. They were just driving the car toward religious goals rather than secular ones.
Right now.
They were operating in their own strength, essentially using God's name as a brand for their own pragmatism, much like Jacob saying, the Lord granted me success.
Using God as a tool.
Yes. True surrender bypasses both cheap grace, which suggests your actions and obedience don't matter at all, and works righteousness, which is the exhausting belief that you can earn your way into God's favor through performance.
The theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer captured this tension beautifully. He wrote, only those who believe obey, and only those who obey believe.
Such a profound paradox.
It really is. You cannot separate the internal trust from the external action. If you truly trust the driver, you let go of the steering wheel. If your hands are still clamped on the wheel, frantically trying to steer, it is the undeniable proof that you don't actually trust the driver, regardless of what you claim to believe.
It is a seamless garment of faith in action.
Okay, so the theology of Watchman Nee and Bonhoeffer is beautiful and robust. But let's get ruthlessly practical, because my mind might agree with everything we just discussed. I can understand paristemi.
On an intellectual level.
Right, but my physical body, my heart rate, my cortisol levels, my nervous system naturally resists surrender. When the pressure hits, my body wants to panic, take control, and fix things. How do we actually live this out? How do we retrain our physical bodies to surrender?
This is where we arrive at the necessity of physical practice. To understand why physical disciplines matter, we look to the theology of N.T. Wright and his extensive work on the concept of the new creation.
Let's unpack N.T. Wright's perspective, because it completely shatters how a large portion of modern believers view the ultimate goal of the Christian life.
Right. Aggressively challenges what he calls soft Gnosticism.
Soft Gnosticism. That's a fascinating term.
It is. Gnosticism is an ancient heresy, but its soft version is a highly prevalent Western idea that the physical earth, our bodies, and material reality are just wicked temporary testing grounds.
Like we're just passing through.
Exactly. In this flawed view, the ultimate goal of salvation is simply to evacuate this physical world when you die and escape to a non-physical, ethereal, cloudy realm called heaven.
It treats the physical world like a sinking ship, and we are just sitting around waiting for the evacuation helicopter.
It makes the physical body seem totally irrelevant to spiritual growth.
But Wright points out that the biblical narrative is radically different. God is the creator of the physical material universe, and he called it very good. His intention is to renew and redeem the physical cosmos, not abandon it.
A renewal.
Yes, this renewal, what the Bible calls the new creation, didn't begin when we die. It began in the middle of history on Easter morning with the literal physical resurrection of Jesus' body.
So matter actually matters. The physical world isn't trash to be discarded. It is a temple being actively restored. And because we are called to be royal priests participating in this physical world right now, our preparation to surrender must involve physical practices.
We have to use our bodies.
We aren't just brains on sticks, floating intellects that simply need better theological data. We are profoundly embodied creatures. If we want to train our souls to surrender to God's timing, we have to deliberately train our physical bodies to stop grasping for control.
And that is exactly where the spiritual disciplines come in. Writers like Dallas Willard and Richard Foster focus heavily on what they call the disciplines of abstinence.
Which is so vital.
And it is vital to state for anyone listening that these practices are not about earning extra credit points with God. They are highly practical tools designed to train the body, the soma, to break the power of compulsive, self-reliant habits.
Let's look at 3 specific disciplines: Sabbath, fasting, and solitude with silence.
Let's start with Sabbath.
In our modern, hyper-connected hustle culture, the concept of a true Sabbath feels almost offensive. It literally feels lazy to people. It feels offensive because Sabbath is a mandatory, weekly cessation from all economic labor and production. It is a radical, physical declaration of our creaturely limitation.
Think about the psychological and theological weight of what that actually communicates.
By deliberately stopping your work, by turning off the laptop, ignoring the emails, and putting down your tools for 24 uninterrupted hours, you are making a profound theological statement with your body and your time.
You're saying, I'm not in charge.
You are declaring that the universe is competently run by God, and it does not depend on your endless worry, your hustle, or your manipulation to survive.
It is the ultimate anti-control mechanism. It forces you to look in the mirror and admit you are not the general manager of the universe. It breaks the illusion of autonomy we talked about earlier with the rich fool.
It is deeply humbling.
Okay, next is the discipline of fasting, deliberately abstaining from food.
Fasting is incredibly potent because it brings the body's most fundamental, primal, biological drive hunger into conscious subjection to the spirit.
I love the way this is often framed. Fasting acts as a physical mirror and a biological alarm clock.
A biological alarm clock, yeah.
Every single time you feel a hunger pang, every time your stomach growls, it serves as a bodily reminder to pray. You are taking a biological urge to consume, and you are intentionally redirecting it toward dependence on God.
You are telling your body, no.
It shifts the human default from material consumption to, as the ancients called it, feasting on God. And historically, there are different types of fasts for different moments of pressure. You see fasts of deep repentance, like David.
Right.
You see fasts of national crisis, like Esther calling the people to abstain from food before she risks her life. There are preparation fasts, like Jesus spending 40 days in the wilderness before beginning his ministry, and the prophetic fast of justice outlined in Isaiah 58.
In all of them, the principle is the same.
In every case, it is a physical act of declaring, God, my ultimate sustenance comes from you, not from what I can put in my mouth or what I can control.
And finally, we look at the paired disciplines of solitude and silence. This involves deliberately disconnecting from human interaction, completely unplugging from social media, escaping the endless noise of culture, and even abstaining from our own speech.
Out of all the disciplines, this is the one that terrifies modern people the most.
Oh, without a doubt.
The idea of just being alone in total quiet for an extended period of time is agonizing for a brain hooked on dopamine and distraction.
It is agonizing because silence and solitude ruthlessly break our addiction to busyness. They break the constant, exhausting need to negotiate our reality, to manage people's perceptions of us, and to spin our image.
We're constantly performing.
When you enter silence, you can no longer manipulate how people view you. You are forced to confront yourself as you actually are. The practice forces us to, as the contemplative writers say, accept the grace of doing nothing.
The grace of doing nothing. That's beautiful.
When you stop talking, stop performing, and stop producing, you are confronted with the terrifying yet liberating realization that God's love and approval of you isn't based on your output.
These physical practices, the economic halt of Sabbath, the biological redirection of fasting, the sensory detox of solitude, they are the exact specific antidotes to the anxiety of control that plagued Saul in the battlefield, that broke Moses in the desert, and that condemned the rich fool in his barns.
They are the cure.
They literally retrain our central nervous systems to tolerate the vulnerability of letting go of the steering wheel. They teach our bodies how to wait.
They are the practical arenas where we actively practice paristemi. We present our bodies to God not by frantically doing more, but very often by deliberately stopping our frantic attempts to run our own lives.
So to bring this all together for you listening right now, at some point you are going to hit the gap. You will find yourself suspended in that terrifying space between your current painful reality and the promises of God.
It happens to everyone.
The timing will feel wrong. The pressure will be immense. And in that gap, you face a fundamental choice. You can either seize the wheel, fueled by the exhausted pathology of human control. You can use your modern goat skins and your Hagar paradigms to force an outcome to make the puzzle piece fit.
And we know how that ends.
And as we've seen through history, that path reliably results in fractured relationships, lost callings, and an endless, exhausting cycle of anxiety. Or you can choose the path of paristemi. You can actively, reasonably, and logically present yourself to God's sovereign timing, trusting that the driver actually knows the way.
And as we close this deep dive, here is a final provocation to mull over as you go about your week. If N.T. Wright's theology is correct, if the new creation has indeed already begun, and God is actively, presently, and sovereignly putting the physical world to rights, what is one specific area of your life right now where you are exhausting yourself trying to run the universe?
Think about that.
What is the one situation, the one relationship, or the one financial anxiety that God is simply waiting for you to hand over?
Are you pounding a puzzle piece into the wrong spot right now? It might be time to put it down. Step out of the driver's seat today, lean into the tension of the weight, and discover the actual profound freedom of true surrender. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.